There's something narcissists almost never say out loud, something they'd probably deny if you ask them directly. They know exactly how they see you, and it isn't what you think. On the surface, they're smooth talkers. They walk into a room and own it. They radiate a kind of certainty that makes people lean in. But underneath all that polish, something very different is happening. The way they actually think about you, privately, quietly, in the moments when the mask slips, has almost nothing to do with the image they project outward. And once you really understand what's going on in their heads, you stop feeling powerless around them. You start to see the whole dynamic for what it is. So let's walk through it together, piece by piece. Most people go through a relationship with a narcissist assuming they were somehow chosen because they were an easy target, someone naive enough to be taken advantage of, or too giving to notice what was happening. That assumption keeps a lot of people stuck, replaying the past and wondering what was wrong with them. But that framing has it backwards. It's worth slowing down and really sitting with what's actually going on beneath the surface, because the truth changes the entire story you've been telling yourself. Here's the first thing that surprises most people. Narcissists don't go looking for people who are fragile, clueless, or hollow. That's a myth. What they're actually drawn to is depth. When a narcissist looks at you, what they notice isn't weakness, it's the opposite. They see your emotional awareness. They see your compassion. They see how steady you are even when life throws chaos at you. Now, on the outside, those traits might look gentle, even soft, but psychologically, they read as strength. Being able to understand your own emotions and everyone else's around you, being able to stay grounded when things get hard, that kind of inner stability is something a narcissist struggles to build for themselves. So instead of avoiding people like that, they gravitate toward them. And here's the part that really catches people off guard. Narcissists usually recognize your strength before you ever recognize it in yourself. They pick up on your quiet confidence even during the moments you're drowning in self-doubt. They notice how easily you connect with people, how others seem to relax and open up around you. They see it all, but instead of admiring it or feeling inspired by it, they start measuring themselves against it. Comparison is baked into how a narcissist's mind works. When they come across someone who's emotionally intelligent and genuinely grounded, it doesn't inspire them, it threatens them. Something in their system reads it as danger. Your empathy in particular gets under their skin. Real empathy takes a kind of security that lets you sit with difficult emotions without falling apart. Most narcissists never develop that skill, so when they watch you handle conflict without losing your cool, when they see you choose thoughtful words instead of lashing out, it exposes exactly what they're trying to hide, their own emotional instability. That's often when the digs start. They might mock your kindness, they might tell you that you're too sensitive or too soft, but those comments usually aren't really about you. They're projections, little leaks of the envy they can't admit to feeling. They also clock your resilience even if they never say so. They notice that you've been through hard things and you're still here, still open-hearted, still willing to trust and connect. That kind of quiet endurance is rare, and it sends a signal. It tells them you can't easily be broken, and that combination, being unbreakable and still warm, both pulls them in and unsettles them at the same time. So sometimes they try to chip away at your confidence, not because they've spotted some flaw in you, but because standing next to your strength makes their own insecurities feel unbearable. Then there's your authenticity, which is its own kind of trigger for them. You don't need to inflate who you are to feel like you matter. You're not performing a version of yourself for approval. You can own your mistakes. You can grow from them without falling apart. That kind of emotional maturity puts their fragile self-image into sharp relief. And somewhere underneath all their bravado, they understand something uncomfortable. What you have can't be faked or bought. It's built slowly, through self-reflection and honesty with yourself, and there's no shortcut to it. So when a narcissist challenges you, tries to undercut you, or attempts to control the relationship, it's rarely just about wanting power for its own sake. More often, it's a defensive reaction to feeling outmatched by the very qualities they wish they had. This is why narcissists tend to study people so closely, and it's rarely coming from a place of genuine curiosity or connection. It's strategic. When they sense someone is emotionally intelligent, self-possessed, or independent, they start collecting information, almost like building a file. They watch how you react under pressure. They pay attention to what makes you smile, what makes you anxious, what earns your trust, and what makes you feel unsafe. This isn't the kind of attention that comes from wanting to know you better. It's analysis, and it's driven by comparison. Think about the difference between someone who asks about your day because they care how you're doing, and someone who asks the same question but is really cataloging your answer for later use. From the outside, both conversations might look identical. The tone might even sound warm, but the intention underneath is completely different. One person is building connection. The other is building a map, quietly noting your patterns, your triggers, your soft spots, so that information can be pulled out and used strategically whenever it's needed. Over time, you may start to notice this without being able to name it right away, a nagging sense that you're being watched more closely than the relationship seems to warrant, that certain comments land a little too precisely, that they always seem to know exactly which button to press. That feeling is worth trusting. Underneath all that outward confidence sits a self-concept that's shockingly fragile. A lot of narcissists build their entire identity out of external validation instead of anything rooted inside themselves. So when they meet someone who feels genuinely grounded, it sets off an internal alarm. They start silently asking themselves whether they measure up, whether they're as capable, as respected, as emotionally solid as the person in front of them. And when the honest answer feels shaky, insecurity creeps in. Instead of dealing with that insecurity by actually growing or reflecting, they try to manage it through control. That's part of why they study you so carefully, because knowing you gives them leverage. If they know exactly what makes you doubt yourself, they can use that against you the moment they feel cornered. If they know what kind of recognition makes you feel valued, they can hold it back deliberately, using it as a tool. Your inner world becomes something they map out, not to understand you, but to gain an advantage over you. A lot of this traces back to deep patterns of comparison that run through narcissistic thinking. Instead of experiencing relationships as something mutual, as two people meeting as equals, they experience them as hierarchies. In their mental model, someone always has to be on top and someone always has to be beneath. So when they notice your strengths, your confidence, your social intelligence, your creativity, your independence, it threatens the sense of dominance they feel like they need to maintain. And naturally, they compensate. Sometimes that compensation shows up as subtle criticism, a backhanded comment here, a dismissive remark there. Other times it looks like competitiveness dressed up as ambition. Suddenly they want to outdo you at everything. They might even start mirroring your interests, your achievements, or aspects of your personality, almost like they're trying to borrow your strength to feel equal to you or better than you. That imitation is really just a defense mechanism against feeling inadequate. Here's what's important to remember, though. The fact that someone is watching you this closely isn't proof that you're weak or that something's wrong with you. If anything, it's proof of the opposite. People don't spend energy studying things they consider insignificant. They study what feels powerful, what feels influential, what feels like a threat to their position. Your steadiness, your self-assurance, all of it puts a spotlight on the cracks in their own foundation. So if you ever notice someone paying unusually close attention to your reactions, unusually aware of exactly where your vulnerabilities are, or oddly competitive whenever your strengths show up, that's probably not admiration you're sensing. It's more likely insecurity dressed up as strategy, a quiet effort to manage the discomfort that your presence stirs up in them. Narcissists like to present themselves as fiercely independent, but the truth underneath is almost the reverse. They rely heavily on emotional input from other people, and what they rarely admit, even privately to themselves, is just how dependent they become on your emotional energy specifically. Your attention regulates them. Your reactions stimulate them. Your approval props up their fragile sense of self. And when that supply gets cut off, they're left facing an uncomfortable emptiness they don't know how to handle on their own. This dependency is part of why being close to a narcissist can feel so intense and so exhausting. When you praise them, they light up. They feel bigger. When you disagree with them or pull back, they feel diminished, almost like a piece of them is missing. Their emotional state rises and falls based on how you respond to them. Emotionally secure people generate their own sense of worth from the inside. Narcissists, on the other hand, tend to outsource that job entirely to whoever's closest to them. They need to see themselves reflected in someone else's reactions just to feel like they exist. You might notice a pattern where conflict seems to appear out of nowhere. Right when things had finally settled into calm, small disagreements get blown up into something much bigger. Minor misunderstandings turn into full arguments. This isn't always a coincidence. Chaos generates stimulation, stimulation pulls in attention, and attention reassures them that they still matter to you, that they still have a place in your emotional world. In a strange way, conflict often feels safer to them than silence because silence carries the threat of being forgotten or unimportant. You might also notice a shift the moment you start pulling back emotionally. They may suddenly accuse you of being cold or distant. They might stir something up deliberately just to bring the intensity back. This isn't really about control in the simplest sense. It's about preserving access to the emotional fuel they've come to depend on. When you're calm and detached, you remove the feedback loop that's been keeping them regulated. Without your reactions to lean on, they're forced to sit with themselves, and that internal space can feel hollow and destabilizing for them. It's worth being clear that this kind of dependency isn't the same thing as deep love. It sits closer to reliance than to real intimacy. They may mistake the rush of your attention for genuine connection. They may interpret your empathy as proof of loyalty that guarantees you'll always be there. But underneath that dynamic is a real imbalance. One person pouring out emotional energy, the other consuming it just to hold themselves together. Once you start to see this pattern clearly, it makes sense why boundaries feel so threatening to them. Boundaries limit access. Emotional neutrality lowers the stimulation they crave. Independence disrupts the supply chain they've been quietly relying on. Your ability to step back and stay calm exposes just how much they needed your presence to feel like they mattered. Understanding all of this changes how you see the whole relationship. Whatever power they seem to hold often came from how much you were engaging with them in the first place. When you become more intentional about your emotional availability, the entire structure that dependency was built on starts to crumble. It's easy to mistake this dynamic for something romantic when you're inside of it. The intensity can feel like passion. The highs and lows can feel like proof of how much someone cares. But intensity and intimacy are not the same thing. And confusing the two is one of the easiest ways to stay trapped in a cycle that keeps repeating itself. Real connection tends to feel calmer than people expect. It doesn't require constant management, constant reassurance, or constant repair. If a relationship only feels alive when there's conflict or crisis pulling everyone's attention toward it, that's usually a sign the connection is being sustained by stimulation rather than genuine closeness. Recognizing that difference, even quietly and privately, is often the first step toward reclaiming your own emotional footing. Narcissists put an enormous amount of effort into building an image, the version of themselves they show the world. That persona is carefully curated, confident, composed, superior, admirable, and none of it happens by accident. They collect compliments like currency. They deflect criticism the second it shows up. They hide any sign of weakness the way most people would hide something shameful. Their entire sense of security depends on keeping that outward image intact. But when someone emotionally perceptive enters their life, the ground shifts a little. You start noticing the inconsistencies. You catch the small contradictions between what they say and what they actually do. You sense the undercurrents that most people walk right past. Your awareness alone creates a kind of quiet pressure, and it becomes harder for them to keep performing without feeling watched. They may never say it out loud, but the possibility that you can see straight through the performance is deeply unsettling to them. If the image cracks, what's actually underneath? That's a question they'd rather never have to answer, and it can trigger real defensiveness. You might notice sudden irritation when you ask a thoughtful question that gets a little too close to the truth. You might notice dismissiveness when you point out something that doesn't quite add up. Those reactions are usually protective, not logical. Projection tends to follow right after. Instead of admitting they're uncomfortable, they might accuse you of overanalyzing things, of being suspicious, of imagining problems that aren't there. By turning the spotlight onto you, they shift attention away from themselves. It's a subtle way of taking back control of the story. If they can get you to doubt your own perception, they get to keep their image intact. Here's something interesting, though. Your calm, steady observation can actually rattle them more than open confrontation would. Confrontation gives them something to push against, something to argue with, dominate, or twist. But quiet awareness without emotional escalation leaves almost no room for manipulation to work. Silence, composure, and a steady sense of self create a kind of tension they can't easily predict or steer. They might test you, telling half-truths, exaggerating stories, painting themselves in a flattering light, just to see whether you'll accept it all without question. If you respond with measured skepticism instead, or simply stay neutral, it rattles them. It tells them the performance isn't landing the way it usually does. This fear of being seen clearly is part of why emotionally intelligent people so often become targets for subtle undermining. If a narcissist can't fully control how you perceive them, they may try to chip away at your confidence instead, hoping that weakening your clarity will protect their mask. And out of everything, independence might be the single most destabilizing quality a narcissist can run into. When you think for yourself, make your own choices without needing constant approval, and hold on to a solid sense of who you are, it throws off the control dynamic they're usually working, often without even realizing it, to build. They tend to walk into relationships expecting influence, expecting emotional leverage over the other person. But when you show real autonomy, the whole balance shifts. Your independence tells them, quietly but clearly, that your sense of worth doesn't come from them. You have your own goals, your own friendships, your own internal compass guiding you. That kind of self-sufficiency can breed resentment in them because it takes away their ability to position themselves as the center of your emotional world. If your life doesn't revolve around them, they lose a source of reassurance they've come to depend on. That resentment doesn't always show up loudly. Sometimes it looks like downplaying your achievements. Sometimes it's questioning your decisions under the guise of concern, advice that carries an undertone of control. By planting little seeds of doubt, they hope to regain some influence. If they can get you second-guessing yourself, they restore a sense of dominance they feel slipping away. Your boundaries only intensify this reaction. When you say no without guilt attached to it, when you disengage from pointless conflict, when you stop over-explaining yourself just to keep the peace, it directly challenges what they expect from you. Boundaries define limits, and limits restrict control. For someone who equates influence with feeling secure, that can feel like a genuine threat. There's a deeper layer underneath all of this, too. Your independence highlights their own dependency by contrast. If you're able to thrive without needing constant validation, it exposes just how much they rely on outside reinforcement to function emotionally. That comparison creates real discomfort inside them, and it often comes out sideways as criticism or as sudden emotional withdrawal. You might notice more testing behavior whenever you assert your independence. They might provoke a reaction, stir up a small crisis, or question your loyalty out of nowhere. None of this is random. It's an attempt to pull you back into emotional negotiation, because if they can do that, they regain a sense of relevance in your decision-making. What stays consistent through all of it is this. The more grounded you become in your own identity, the more visible their need for control becomes. Your independence doesn't weaken the connection between you, it clarifies it. And for someone whose sense of security depends on holding influence over others, that kind of clarity can feel like losing power itself. This is also why so many people describe a strange kind of guilt after setting a boundary with a narcissist, even when the boundary was completely reasonable. That guilt isn't a sign you did something wrong. It's usually a trained response, built up over time by a dynamic where your needs were quietly discouraged and their reactions were treated as the priority. Recognizing that the discomfort you feel after saying no is not evidence of wrongdoing, but evidence of a system that's losing its grip on you, can be one of the most freeing realizations in the entire process. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are simply the truth of who you are, stated out loud, without apology attached to it. Despite all the confidence they project outward, narcissists are usually more aware of loss than they ever let on. When someone genuine walks away, someone loyal, emotionally present, and patient, it leaves a mark, even if they'd never admit it. They may not show any sign of it publicly. Pride tends to get in the way of that. But privately, there's often a quiet recognition happening. They understand, on some level, the difference between surface-level admiration and something real. You offered depth. You actually listened. You made an effort to understand them, and you invested emotionally in a way that was consistent and sincere. That kind of presence isn't easy to replace, no matter how quickly someone tries to fill the space with new attention. Novelty isn't the same thing as substance. What tends to unsettle them most is realizing that you saw both their strengths and their flaws clearly, and you chose to stay and engage with integrity anyway. Genuine acceptance like that is rare, and somewhere inside, they know it. So when that acceptance disappears, it leaves behind a real psychological gap. They might try to convince themselves you were replaceable, that you were too sensitive, that you never really met their standards in the first place. These are just stories they tell themselves to protect their ego. But stories like that don't erase the underlying awareness completely. Often there's a quiet comparison happening in the background afterward. New people might bring plenty of validation and excitement, but they may lack the emotional depth or steadiness that you brought into the relationship. Over time, that contrast becomes obvious, at least to them, even if they never voice it. Real loyalty can't be manufactured through charm alone. Genuine emotional safety can't be faked through performance. No matter how convincing the performance is, when someone grounded leaves, the whole emotional atmosphere shifts, and it's hard not to notice the difference. Regret, in narcissistic psychology, rarely looks like a straightforward apology. More often it shows up sideways, an unexpected attempt to reconnect, quietly checking in on you from a distance, or bringing up old memories out of nowhere. Sometimes it appears as unexplained irritation whenever your name comes up in conversation. Emotional reactions like these tend to reveal exactly what pride is working hard to conceal. They may never openly acknowledge how much you actually meant to them. Doing that would require confronting a level of vulnerability they've spent their whole life avoiding. But somewhere inside, there's often an awareness that losing someone self-aware, resilient, and emotionally grounded isn't a small thing. It challenges the comfortable belief that people are easily interchangeable, that anyone can be swapped out for someone new without consequence. When you walk away with your composure intact, when you leave with clarity instead of chaos, it forces a kind of reflection they can't fully escape, no matter how carefully they try to manage the image they show the rest of the world. So if you take one thing away from all of this, let it be this. Your empathy, your self-awareness, your ability to stay grounded under pressure, none of that is a weakness that made you a target. It's exactly the opposite. It's the very thing that made you threatening to someone who never learned how to build that kind of strength for themselves. Understanding that doesn't just explain the past. It hands you back something you might not have realized you'd lost, your own clarity and your own power to choose what happens next.